Well, hey, Bible Love listeners, so glad you are with us today. I wanted to start out in prayer. So the Lord be with you. God, please help me to make peace with yesterday and have an open mind and heart for today. Help me to be a blessing to those that need it. Help me to see the good around me, the good in others, and the good in myself. Guide me into living like you with selflessness and love. All this we pray in your name. Amen.
Amen.
So, listeners, huge treat today. You are getting to experience the joy of the Reverend James Franklin. James is the campus and young adult missioner, in the Winston-Salem area in the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina. James and I go way back. We were just talking about his daughter is 9, and I was there when she was born. So we went to the Seminary of the Southwest together. James was in the class before me, and he and his wife just welcomed and embraced me and loved me so well. And I'm so grateful for those 3 years. And then when I was in the Diocese of North Carolina, I actually served at the church that James's dad served for many years. So we got to do some ministry together. So James, I'm just so thankful you're here. And I'm so grateful to have you as my dear friend. So glad you're here. Pleasure
to be here. Good to see you. Good to catch up.
Yeah.
I love what you're doing with the podcast. It's great. It's such a ministry. It's a gift.
Thank you, James. And listeners, you will notice Alan is not with us. I have not kicked him off. He is still around, but as often happens in parish ministry, people show up at your door and they need you right there in that minute. And that's what happened with Alan today. So hopefully he will join us again next week. So today we are going to finish up Chronicles. So today our goal is to work through 2 Chronicles 10 through 36. So I was laughing, telling James that I was asking him to dig into Chronicles with me, which we have discovered is not in the lectionary at all. So
nope, at all.
Ever preach on. But it has been a good journey for me, James, because just like learning a lot more about what we've already learned. Like I'm that kind of learner, like I need to hear it again, but also hearing it from a different voice, a different lens. So just Chronicles in general, like what have you thought about when you think about Chronicles? I would just love to have your thoughts on that.
Well, I self-admission here, I had not read Chronicles since seminary.
Right. So 2011. And why would you, James? It's not in the lectionary, right?
Right. And as you've already said in previous episodes, it gives a lot of the same information that Kings does. If you've read Kings, then it's why read Chronicles.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I've noticed in looking back at it and rereading it is that I get this vibe from God that I don't get in Kings.
Oh, talk about that.
Yeah. And the vibe is God still really cares for God's people amidst all of this behavior, acting out. Right?
Inappropriate behavior.
It says faithlessness, right? And other words like that. But I get this vibe from God that it's like, you messed up, but you're still my people. You're still the people. And then kind of within, you get these little glimpses of different characters saying, hey, are we still the people of God?
Mm-hmm.
Like when a prophet, kind of comes up out of nowhere who isn't anywhere else in the Bible. It talks about Jeremiah at the end. So obviously Jeremiah is a different story, but these other prophets that pop up that God is speaking through, saying, you know, are you still God's people? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I love
um,
that point, James. And I hadn't really thought about that. So I'm grateful you brought that up. So we as people in 2022, like, so desperately need to feel God's love. Like, I mean, I feel like every prayer I pray for someone, I'm like, please, God, let them feel your love, and God's love is always there, but like for us to like feel it in our bones and inside of us. And I think you're right. Like, I didn't feel that as much in Kings. And I think that that is a little, from the chronicler, is giving that more empathetic love of God in what we're reading in Chronicles. I think that's an awesome point. Yeah. And I
yeah.
hadn't really thought about it.
And it's also interesting. I hadn't really thought about that either. But there's this, you can get kind of bogged down in all the wrath and retribution language and miss the cycle of resurrection that is also happening.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if we know going into it that there's this question behind it of God's covenant and still being God's people, then that kind of changes how we view the narrative of not just this recollection, this reporting of, here's a king, they messed up. Here's another king, they really messed up. Here's another king, they really screwed up. Here's one who's not so bad, but still messed up.
Yeah,
um,
James, I
it's
love that.
easy to
Like,
do
we're
also.
moving from like the history, right? Which is important, an important part of the Bible. But I
Yeah,
think as readers in 2022, we sometimes are like, wait, why? Why do we need to keep hearing about all these people that messed up?
right.
We get it. We get it. People messed up. Got it. I mean, this
Mhm.
portion that I wanted to talk about today, Second Chronicles 10 through 36, is basically all about division. It is all about division. Like, we'd had David, we'd had Solomon, and now they're just a big old hot mess,
That's
right?
right.
But I
Yeah,
love that you're finding the
yeah.
resurrection story in that. And that's what we really need to gain in 2022.
I'm an eternal optimist. So like for me, I'm always looking for the silver lining in there of like, all right, where's the good news?
Yeah.
Take me
Well,
to the
that's
good
why I
news.
love you, James, because we're very much alike in that. Like, we've been accused of being Pollyannas in the
I
world,
know,
and we need
right?
Pollyannas in the world, right?
Don't mistake our optimism for naivete. All
No,
right.
we're not naive. We just know where the silver lining is, and we go for it.
Yeah.
Yep.
The world needs you, Mary Balfour, and needs that optimism for sure.
And you.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit more with me, if you don't mind, like, about that resurrection instead of just
Mm,
all this division. Like, tell me
mm.
what you see that in this. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you start Chronicles with Solomon
Mhm.
and all the glory, the golden days, this kind of nostalgia almost voice that you're hearing of remember back when things were good. Now
Mhm.
things are, really, really awful. And they're kind of like, it's almost like there's this juxtaposition of this golden years of David and Solomon, and not even recounting the bad stuff that Solomon did in Chronicles. It
Right.
totally paints Solomon in this 100% positive light,
Right.
you know,
Which we know is not true.
which we know is not true from the King's account, right? And so it's like, why would they do that? Well, it's obviously not important to them. That's not the point. Uh, they start with the golden years and they end with disaster. They end with the captivity. They end with um, folks being captured by the Babylonian Empire, by King Nebuchadnezzar, and they destroy the temple. They burn Jerusalem to the ground. It's just the worst that could happen, right? And I think the point, it was hard to reason and find that resurrection cycle in it. But
Mhm.
once I did, I just kept on seeing it. And
Yeah.
the thing that broke through for me was this kind of energy from Yahweh that is in the text around almost like a parent. And I get this like parenting language that, as you know, as a father of a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, I don't think I would have necessarily had the lens to see that. But once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it, that, God is letting God's people mess up, but still has a covenant with them because God loves them. And it's like my own kids, there's nothing that you could ever do that would make me love you less. But sometimes I have to let you make some bad choices and some poor decisions so that you can learn.
Yeah.
And, without that lens, without that frame, or just without thinking of the cycle of, well, you can't have resurrection if you don't have any death. You can't have resurrection, and the life bit if you don't have some dying to the self, if you don't have some pain, if there's not suffering. Richard Rohr always talks about, the descent, the path of descent is always the path of ascent, that on the way down we find resurrection and hope, and we find grace, and we find that gift. And that's hard to see in the moment, but I get this sense from this text that, even so, there was a line when one of the kings screws up, and it says, but God did not destroy them because of the covenant God made with his ancestor David. And it's just like return. It's like, you made some poor choices, and I'm not going to intervene, but I still love you.
Yeah.
I still have this promise to you. And I see that as a parent of, this kind of sense that, well, I didn't bring you into this world to cause pain. Like, of course, as a kid, like, we try to shelter you from some of that right now. Like, I try to keep my 5-year-old from
Right.
experiencing worldly pain, and from heavy topics and existential things that are going on in the world. But to a point, like, I think the pandemic was interesting in that, like, she realized, like, they're suffering, why can't I see my friends? Is it because of the virus, like she said, as a 3-year-old,
Yes,
not
because she knows that word virus as a 3-year-old.
Yeah. And so, but we didn't bring her into the world for her to experience pain.
Right.
We brought her in because of love. It was just the overflow and outflow of love. There's so much of an abundance between us, that it was just this outflow. And I think for folks that aren't parents, like, we still experience this nurturing, mothering, fathering, language, and energy that we expend on other things, and we give because of love, not because of, hey, I didn't create this thing to bring pain for y'all. We did this out of love, kind of a tough love language.
Yeah. And, so much comes up for me when you're talking about that. So many fantastic points. The first one, I want to go back a little bit to, the death to have resurrection. So, one of the things I love to do with my parish is I like us to read together in the summer, and then we do like a 6 or 7 week Sunday school class about what we read. So this summer, and Alan, I hope if you're listening, you are going to be listening, but I hope you attach this to the show notes. We did Rachel Held Evans' Searching for Sundays.
Oh yeah.
Which is a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, you should. So yesterday we had our first Sunday school class, and the way she divides it up is like through the sacraments. And so it was baptism. And she talks a lot about that death that even in baptism, like which is supposed to be this joyous day, that there is death in that, because there is new life and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I think that is exactly what you're saying, even though Jesus had not come at the time of the Chronicles, like there is death in this, but God's love never leaves us. Then I was thinking about the parenting when you were talking about that, and no, I'm not a parent, but I think that we all and I love that you can look at this from a different lens than like even when we were in seminary when you weren't a parent, and now you have this lens of that, which is so, but we all a lot of us are visual people. So we can imagine, even if our parents are not it's not a great experience for us, we've all seen healthy parents at some point, we know. And so that imagery of God living into that, I think is so beautiful, because I think a lot of times, I don't know about you, but when I teach or try to interpret the Bible, so many people say, why did God let all this bad stuff happen? And I think you just framed that so beautifully, James, and that God doesn't let all these bad things happen. He didn't bring us into the world to experience all this bad, but sometimes he has to let us go a little bit, and make the mistakes just like parents do with their kids. But that love for us never ends. And I think that is just so evident in this. So I love that lens that you're coming from.
Yeah. And I think in terms of suffering, the readers, the hearers of this text at the time totally interpreted as bad things happen because God made them happen, right? And I think that,
because they didn't have Jesus, so they didn't know, right?
They didn't, yeah. And so, but we also see suffering from a different lens now, and that is that that God doesn't necessarily cause suffering to happen like the Buddhists say suffering is, right?
Suffering it's part of life,
right? And the place where we find God in that is, okay, well, what is the resurrection? What is the life that can happen from this suffering? Where in the midst of this are we able to have eyes to see how God is moving in this? And what is it like, speaking very kind of metaphorically, I guess, of well, sometimes those are things that had to be put to death in us,
right?
That they're for me as a man, it's definitely ego. It's definitely death to the ego, and sometimes that needs to get put to death so that I can see some more resurrection and some life happening.
Absolutely. I feel that way about so many things, and I can see that in what we've read today too. And even as women, sometimes it's ego, or it's not living up to expectations. A lot of time for women, I feel like they have that issue. We want to please a lot of people, and we're going to fail in that, but sometimes that needs to die so that the resurrection can happen and be a part of us.
It's kind of like
did you preach yesterday? No,
I didn't, but yeah. Did you?
Yeah. So Jeremiah and Luke,
Sure.
What was so struck to me about both of those, and it talks, I feel like this has some connection to what we're talking about today, is that sort of lost and found element that was there. And it's not that God wanders away from us, just like God did not wander away from the people in 2nd Chronicles. It's us that wanders away, right? And God is always there. And we like to say, where are you, God? Where are you, God? I'm not feeling you. But God never leaves us. God's love never leaves us. And it's evident in going to find that sheep, or, I feel like that lost and found aspect is always around. But isn't that good in some ways? Because we need that resurrection, that death, all of that. We need those moments because it brings us more into relationship with God, I think.
Yeah. And in these stories from the Old Testament, we hear this frame of God wanting to hit the reset button.
Yeah.
Often, right?
Yeah.
I think the other track for yesterday was Exodus,
Oh
and
yes, and track 2.
Moses coming down, and people are acting a fool, and God's like, I'm gonna destroy them, and Moses is like, hold on a second. Let's think about this. So very like Jesus figure in like let's, let's go back to the covenant. Like, surely you're not going to destroy your people.
Yeah.
You said you wouldn't again,
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's this, yes, you really screwed up, but I'm still with you. Yeah.
Never gonna leave you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I did kind of enjoy, honestly, kind of, I don't know, masochistically or something, of kind of reading about how terrible people were.
Yeah, no, I get it. Because doesn't it make you feel better?
Reading.
Yeah, doesn't it make you feel better about yourself? Like in some way. But I have felt that way in all of reading the Old Testament, because it's not just like that part, but like when people mess up, I'm like, okay, there are people I can relate to on this. Jared, another dear friend of ours from seminary, was on, and he was kept kind of referring back to. He asked me several times, like, how, because there's some really traumatic things that happen to women, and he was like, how does this make you feel? And I was like, well, fortunately, this does not happen to me, but I do know women that this has happened to. And for them, I'm so grateful that they can look to the Bible and be like, there are other people that this has happened to, and I can see the suffering that they went through. Maybe there's something here that can help me get through my suffering. And so I think that's a beautiful point of the Bible too, is that we can relate to some of these things. Maybe not in these terrible, wars and stuff that, I mean, we have war now. I don't mean that, but in some of the crazy things that happen, the snakes and the dragons and all that, and they're not dragons, but all those things. But I think there's something very relatable in a lot of this too.
Yeah, very relatable. I got to talk about, speaking of relatable, this one king, that I had totally missed this part of it, in the first reading, but in chapter 21, Jehoahaz.
Yeah, you said that well. You said that
probably botched that.
Good job.
So Hebrew scholars, give me a pass on that, okay?
Lots of
but when it says the Lord struck his bowels, and they came out, and he died in great agony.
I know.
And his people made no fire in his honor.
I know.
And then the last dagger, though, the one that really like hit me, it says he departed with no one's regret.
Yeah, my version says nobody was sorry when he died. And then it says they buried him in David's city, but not in the royal tombs.
Oh yeah, that was a kind of a line for some of the kings that they repeated.
Yeah, like that shows where you got buried.
Right.
Showed how important you were. But this guy was not liked. They did not like him at all.
Yeah, I kind of think like, I've been in this like male spirituality kick lately, and so like I'm also kind of interpreting through like lens of what it means to be a spiritual man. And like I read into this is a huge ego check on the people of God. It's this check on, you know what, you're not that important. You're not as important as you think, which is a hard lesson to learn as an individual.
So hard.
But it's an important lesson. But the flip side of that is you still have inherent value to God. And so it's like, yeah, you're not important, but you still matter. And that was just this dynamic that's happening all throughout the text, even with this terrible, King Jehoahaz, who departed with no one's regret. No one was sorry that he died.
But they still buried him.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, that proves your point. Like, yeah, no one was sorry that he died, but he still had a proper burial. Maybe it wasn't in the most elite place, but someone thought that was important enough to write that down. So that does show that he was loved by God, and he was part, and so you're right. I mean, even in those moments where we're like, oh my gosh, God's love never fails in that. All right. Any parting words? That was my timer because we've talked for 25 minutes.
Nice. I was going to ask, was that the, the cutoff?
Yeah.
Oh,
I have to do it because I'll keep talking all day long.
I know, me too. And I could just keep talking to you, Mary Balfour. I miss you, and it's so good to see you. Parting words of wisdom. Let me see here. I think it's really important for us to have eyes to read a text like this and not get caught up in all the wrath and retribution nature of God. That if we think of God just like a parent who is letting their children make poor decisions, suffer the consequences, and still being welcomed back with open arms. I mean, you said yesterday we were in Luke 15, lost people, lost sheep, lost coins. We didn't get to the story of the prodigal son or the prodigal father, as some have called it, but these things have inherent value, and people, that's different. That's different than other deities, other gods in that time. And this is kind of radical. It's kind of radical to think that no matter what you do, God has made a covenant with you and loves you no matter what. And it's easy to miss that.
It is. Thank you so much for your wisdom in that. I love how you came to this today. And I'm grateful for your voice and your ministry and who you are. And listeners, remember that we love you, but most importantly, God does.